Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our very first alumni Q&A webinar for 2026. As you might know, or this is your first time, this series of webinars dives into the real stories, the challenges, and the wins, big and small, in the classroom, straight from those who've lived it. I'm Ian. I'm from cohort 2017, and I'll be your host tonight. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my deep respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend that respect to any First Nations people here with us tonight, and of course, acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution, and declare firmly here that sovereignty was never ceded. As you're listening, feel free to pop into the chat which First Nations country you reside on or joining us from today so we can get a sense of all the places we are tuning in from tonight. So here's a bit of what to expect in this webinar. So first of all, we'll kick off with some quick introductions from our panelists, and then we'll dive into a few pre-prepared questions before opening it up to you all for a live Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box anytime. If this is your first time joining in a webinar function, there's a Q&A chat that's dedicated just to those questions. So feel free to chuck them in there and we'll keep an eye on it and answer any questions as they come up. And of course, the session is being recorded and our really great team will send it out to you after the conclusion of the webinar. So if you are new to Teach for Australia, I'm so excited to be able to share a bit of a bio on the organisation that I'm so proud to be working for. We are a not-for-profit organisation and we work really hard to close the education gap. We do this by placing exceptional, talented individuals into schools that serve low socioeconomic communities. And we support those people to become really great teachers and school leaders. Since 2010, over 1,700 associates have taught in more than 300 schools across Australia. All right, let's get stuck into it. I'm going to start with a little bit about myself because I did the program and I'm always so excited to be able to talk about my experience because it was a pretty formative one. I heard about Teach for Australia through a university lecturer of mine, actually. I was doing a Bachelor of Laws at the University of New South Wales and had been kind of questioning my career pathways. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I had this problem with an assessment in my property law class. I didn't do so good, but my lecturer pulled me over and he said, "Hey, I reckon you could have another go at this and maybe still get your marks up. But have you thought about being a teacher?" And I thought, oh, that's a bit different. But he told me all about Teach for Australia. And it turned out he had been a campus brand ambassador himself before he moved into the law. I was then placed in the Northern Territory to do my 2 years of teaching in the program. And now I'm working back at Teach for Australia in the government relations team. Now I'm going to hand over to our very first speaker, Alice, to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their journey through TFA. So Alice, can you tell us about your relationship and history with Teach for Australia, what cohort you're in, how you heard about the program, and your school history?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name's Alice, and I am in cohort 2022. So I finished two bachelor's degrees and was sort of entering the job market around the time of COVID. I was working in music, and just everything was getting cancelled. So I was really looking for a big shift in my life, and I'd always had teaching on in the background. I was the eldest of five, and I think a lot of my family members and people who knew me thought that I had I guess the characteristics or the personality to be a person that can nurture young people. But I did want to be, I wanted to have some experience in the real world first. So I did a year in music administration, and I was interested in having a career in mathematics. But then I heard of Teach for Australia, and I sort of had the mindset shift because I came from a very academic selective high school, grew up in Sydney, and it was sort of like the notion of if you can't do, you teach. But I think through hearing about Teach for Australia and really sort of thinking about how much I valued my own education and how I'd like to see students of all sort of diverse backgrounds come into something like studying maths at a higher level, I thought it'd be really nice change to be on the ground and contributing to a cause. And so I moved to Melbourne. I'm still teaching at the school that I was placed at, and yeah, having a good time just continually improving my practice. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Alice. I'm also the eldest of five. And so when I told my parents that I was going to become a teacher, they were like, told you so. Should have listened to us to start with. But here we are. I'm going to hand over to you now, Izzy. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship and history with TFA, what cohort you're in, etc., how you heard about the program?
So my name's Izzy. I am part of cohort 2024, which means that I finished the TFA program at the end of last year. But essentially kind of how I got into TFA was that I'd sort of always had a bit of an interest in teaching. And then when I started my undergraduate, I kind of threw that out of the window and decided that I wanted to try 100 different things. And so I did my undergraduate in media and communications and Italian and sort of had no kind of inkling of going to teaching. And I ended up going to law school for a year. And I went and did that and I enjoyed it, but I really wasn't sure that I wanted to practice law. And law school is obviously a very big undertaking for people who don't necessarily want to do that in the end. And I'd sort of had enough of uni, so I took 2 years off and I went and lived in Canada and I worked in tourism. And I just did like lots of silly things over there. And then my visa ran out and I came home and I was like, okay, I need to get a job. I need to sort of think about like a career that really interests me. And I had a conversation with my mum and TFA came up because she had this is so strange. She had been at a dinner at her friend's house and she'd met a teacher who works at a school that a lot of TFA get placed at. And this teacher had just raved about the quality of graduates from the TFA program and had spoken about how prepared they were and how exceptional they were as teachers and how much they cared for their students and that not only the academics of the students but also the well-being of the students. And that I guess really spoke to me. And so I did a little bit of my own research and saw all about TFA's kind of mission statement about educational equity. And I felt that that really aligned with my own values. And then on top of that, the idea of kind of getting to start my career after, I guess I don't really want to say like having kind of missteps because I think it all kind of led me here in a really great way. But having put that on hold for quite a while, the idea of being able to get into a classroom right away and start, I guess, practicing things that really aligned with my values and that TFA mission was really, really exciting. So in 2024, I moved up to Shepparton, which is in Northeast Regional Victoria, where I still am. So I finished a program at the end of last year, but decided to stay on in Shepparton. And I teach humanities, sociology, and legal studies. Um, I was lucky enough that in my second year, I got to take on like a bit of a position of leadership around diversity and inclusion for LGBTQIA plus students at the school, which was just like such a dream come true. It was really, really cool. And I've still got that position. Um, and yeah, now I'm just like working away at that role, but also really working on improving my teaching practice this year without having to focus on sort of the uni component, which is really, really nice.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Izzy. It's so lovely to hear how everyone gets to TFA in such windy, windy ways. Like, I think the windy path for those who land at TFA is probably the norm rather than the exception. So you're among friends here. I really like how you talked to being drawn to the mission and being able to get started, get stuck into the work straight away, because that's totally how I felt as well. I'm going to hand over to you now, Aladdin. Oh, actually, before I do that, can I just remind those of you who are joining us on the webinar, feel free to please drop your Q&A questions into the chat so that we can see them as we're going along, as we progress through these stories. So Aladdin, sorry. Can you tell us about your relationship with TFA, what cohort, etc.? You know the drill.
Thank you. Yes, so I was part of the 2020 cohort or the COVID cohort. So that was an interesting experience, starting TFA at that time. Previously, I'd worked in education policy or also in student support, so in disability classrooms. But I was noticing that I really wanted to make more of an impact on the ground. For me personally, I was like really wanted to have that connection with the kids. And with young people, I didn't really want a desk job, and I could just see myself personally. I knew it wasn't going to make me happy long term, although I still sit down quite a bit, to be honest, in the day to day now. But I actually heard about TFA through the colleagues I work for. A lot of TFAs are still obviously in education, and a lot of people I worked with were really impressive, and they'd all actually come from the common TFA call. And I was like, oh, what is this program? So really through working directly with them and hearing their passion, and wanting to make a difference. Obviously, they'd found it in policy. For me, I was like, you know what, I think I want to be on the ground. And that's how I sort of got started and applied. I started at Numurkah Secondary College. So that is about 30 minutes north of Shepparton. So interestingly, last person as well. I was there for 3 years. Probably the most formative experience of my entire life. Definitely made me the person and the teacher I am today. I'd always lived in very big cities like London, like Auckland, Sydney. I'm from Sydney originally, and I was like, "There's no way I'm going to the country. What is this?" And there we were. It was a rural town, less than 300 kids in the school, dairy farm. You're literally passing tractors on the way to work, like a whole different world. And in my first year, I led an alternative program. So I was sort of thrust into leadership, not necessarily for my own doing, but I was given the most difficult and most challenging students that none of the teachers in the school could deal with. And we had to create a program that wasn't yet created. Now, that is not a usual experience, but it really thrust me into this sort of well-being centric teacher role that I try to take on today. In the second and third year, so I was at the school for 3 years. I took on head of year 9 and head of year 10, and taught humanities and English. So was able to teach all the different, strands of humanities in multiple different year groups. And now I've just done 4 years in my 4th year in Adelaide. So I'm at a very different school now. I'm the current head of humanities. So I have a very, very large group of people who I manage and work with. It's about 1,600 students at my school. I went from sort of rural town with all white students, dairy farm, to a school now where there's over 70 different language groups, 1,700 students. So a very, very broad and very large change, but still really enjoying the experience. Very different from where I started, but I wouldn't have been the same, honestly, without starting and doing TFA.
Amazing. Thank you, Aladdin. And I know the school that you're at because I live in Adelaide also. And seriously, what a massive change, and well done for making that adjustment. It's so cool to see. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I know you all haven't yet really prepared for. So I'm happy to open this into a bit of a discussion. And I think we all have our own experiences to share. But I think what this webinar is really about is getting to that point of hitting submit on the application form. And so if each of the panelists, if you wouldn't mind having a moment to reflect on what were the kind of steps that took you that brought you to hitting submit. I know each of us have heard from friends or friends of friends or bits and bobs here and there. And I know for me, it took that exposure from my uni lecturer was just one piece in the puzzle. It took a couple of different steps or different interactions to get me to the point where it crystallized and I was able to hit submit. What was the kind of thing that was that crystallizing moment? If you could each have a think about what that might be, and come off mute when you're ready to share. Right, why don't you start us off, Alum?
I was just kind of thinking like, what was the moment? I think for me, it was sort of like thinking about the person that I wanted to be or the job that I wanted to have in the future. I know it sounds odd, but the physicality of teaching was a really big thing for me. I wanted to be like fully present and immersed. Teaching is very much when you're in front of a classroom, like you are, you're sort of like putting out fires. You've got behavior management, you've got the class, you've got the content, you've got the differentiation, you've got who's going to come in the room and you're not expecting, like you're speaking, you're moving. I think that for me was a really big thing. I'm not an actor at all, but I really enjoyed that level of like being on and being full bodied. Emotionally, I think I really always enjoyed working with kids. And so there was that idea of like connection, and wanting to like get to know them, obviously to help educationally, but also to help from a wellbeing perspective. and I wanted the challenge. I think it's very easy to get comfortable in roles, and certainly that can happen in teaching, but no day is the same. You think you have a schedule, and that schedule often gets completely tossed out of the water, whether you're a teacher or a leader, anything like that. So I think that level of unpredictability and like change and fun was probably for me why I was like, yep, I wanted to do that. Also being part of a large cohort of people who are like basically a program is chosen because they're like-minded, like that was a really big thing for me. I'd moved to Melbourne at the time where I was living, and I didn't have many connections, and I thought, well, wouldn't this be a great way to honestly like make friends? As weird as it might sound. So I think yeah, those sort of, that's a bit of a multifaceted reason, but that was why I definitely hit click.
Amazing, thank you. And it's funny that I think for you, your kind of pre-program, pre-application experience is quite unique in that you got to see a lot of the classroom stuff before, so you kind of had a clear idea of what you're getting into.
Very much
I had like 1 out of 10 idea. I was
so.
like, I'm totally drawn to the mission and vision. I had no clue what it would be like on the ground, but when I did my first kind of prac in school, I just felt this like adrenaline rush that I was like, I love this. It is
Yeah,
so,
it's
so
a real high.
yeah, it so is. And I saw this thing, someone was like, being a teacher is like driving a bus full of like different sized animals, and you're about to drive off the cliff and the bus is going backwards or something like super ridiculous like that. And
Yeah.
no other metaphor has come close to describing that, but it is such a feeling. Yeah, go on.
And you very much notice it when you speak to friends who are not in teaching. And this isn't
Yes.
necessarily just a teacher. This is anyone who's a teacher, whether it be primary, early childhood, secondary. Your days are so much more interesting. People
Yeah.
almost like crave to hear your stories. Feel like a bit. You're like, oh, and this happened, and like, there's no lesson plan or unit plan that's going to encapsulate like the comments you'll hear, both very inappropriate and appropriate. The questions
Mm,
you'll be asked you just didn't even expect, or the
yeah.
interruptions that you might have, be it, a bird's been brought into the class, or the student decided to like, jump out of the first floor window because you didn't like your class, ground floor, so I should say. But, like these are random experiences, but they've like make, I guess, like a very rich experience
Mm.
as a teacher. And yeah, I think that's just way more exciting, honestly.
100%. And you also never expect the things that like will come out of your mouth. Never would I have expected to tell the students not to drink from the beaker. Like, don't eat that glass that was in the sink. Like, that's
Mm,
not smart. But yeah, you're right. There is this thrill to being in front of
yes,
the classroom that I
very much so.
I dearly, dearly miss in my role right now. Izzy, did you want to share how kind of like I'm really curious about your story because you heard from your mum who'd met someone. Like, did they have a previous connection before? Like, yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I guess like hearing such like a glowing review of the TFA alums, and how well-rounded their teaching was a really key kind of thing for me when I was looking at, I guess, TFA versus other teaching programs. And you can read a whole lot in the media about teaching as a profession and how challenging it can be sometimes, and how badly we need teachers in the classroom. And I guess that really kind of spoke to me, and I was really ready to get in there. On top of that, I guess I just come back from living overseas, and I wasn't really keen on getting going back to uni and just sort of again. Like I'd done that for 4 years, and I lived a very exciting life in Canada, and so I was sort of ready for like another big change. And I grew up in inner city Melbourne my whole life. And so to move regionally and start this whole new career where I guess to sort of echo what Aladdin was saying, you really are kept on your toes and no day is the same, was just so exciting for me. And I definitely thought it was going to be a challenge. My dad actually said to me after my first year that he didn't think I was going to last a week in Shepparton. But I've enjoyed it so much. And yeah, just the big change and how exciting it is to move away and completely change what you're doing. But also how rewarding it is to be in the classroom and just yeah, how exciting it is. It really is something that keeps you on your toes. And I guess I'd heard a little bit about that, but I didn't realize how on my toes I was gonna have to be until I was really thrust in there. But it's been so much fun, and it's really cool to be able to see the change that you can kind of affect even on like just such a micro level, day to day in a classroom in a student's life. Even, my first 6 months in the program where my teaching is completely different now to what it was then. And how much as like the students value just having the same teacher for a subject and not having to have substitute teachers every lesson and see a new face every single lesson for this class. Um, like that was just so rewarding to see we're doing so quickly. So yeah, I guess yeah, those were kind of the things that really led me to yeah, press submit on my application.
Amazing. Thank you. Um, Alice, would you share a little bit about how you kind of got from interested or like learning about TFA into pressing submit?
I was actually very hesitant the entire application process. I remember just knowing that my job was becoming very mundane and I needed a change. And I wanted to do something where I would learn, or I would like continue to grow. But having already studied for, however many years, I didn't want to just be in the classroom. So I thought it was like a really good deal that I could start, um, you know, being in the classroom straight away and like learning whilst studying. Um, it just seemed really nice. And then I was introduced to someone, like a friend of a friend who had done TFA, who also said it was the right, um, choice for her. And so just that made it really real. So I actually put an application through in the last round, like it was just so last minute. And then I was still apprehensive. I was thinking about deferring, but then I met the assistant principal and the principal of the school that I'm at. And the assistant principal, she's also TFA alum. She just talked the entire time. And I thought, wow, this place seems really women led. And I think I was, having been in a maths degree where like there were not many women, I think that was really nice feeling. And I always had the thought that I'd like to be working with girls and, helping them realize that they're actually quite good at maths and maybe that they could consider a career in it. So yeah, I think all those kind of boxes had to be ticked. And then I was also placed in Melbourne, which is not, yeah, too different from like living in the Sydney inner city. So it was kind of, everything just kept pointing me into this is the right time for you to do this. Yeah.
Amazing. I might come back to placement and what that was like for each of us a little bit later, but I kind of want to dig it further into how you found the application process. So, because I applied in 2016, which is 10 years ago now, which is just wild, but I applied so long ago that we used to get in person. Used to get flown to a location to do our in-person assessment centers. And so my experience is quite different. For those of you in the audience, a few years ago, TFA switched to doing all of the assessments for applications online. So everything is virtual now. There are all these steps to the application process, and they're all virtual. And our team works really, really hard to make sure that those experiences during the assessment process are as participant friendly as we can make them. Being online for a whole day or doing things virtually can be really tough if you're have other commitments and such, but also be still making sure that the selection process is quite rigorous, that we give people the opportunity to show us what they can do and what they're capable of, and how they thrive under challenge, as best we can. So still get a good assessment of the individuals without the barriers of needing to travel or needing to get time off work to go to a place in the way that back in the day we used to. So I wonder if you three wouldn't mind sharing how you found the application process. I might start with you, Alice, because you did share that you were quite hesitant throughout the process. Like, talk us through what it was like for you. How did you find each of the stages, and what were your kind of things that you were hesitant about?
I think I'm just such a perfectionist So any application, like I just feel like I have to be I have to have the qualifications, but I think just remembering that everyone doesn't know what they're doing. Like we're all beginning teachers. Nobody has an education degree. So I just honestly just did it as fast as I could on the last day, press submit. And then I don't remember much about that. The only thing I remember was, is there still you have to give a 7-minute like lesson?
Yeah,
And I
that's
just
certainly the
remember,
case.
yeah, online. And I just remember practicing with my friends. I invited a couple of friends onto a Zoom call and just said, pretend you're students. Can you please give me feedback on this mini lesson? And yeah, that's all I remember. I think it's, yeah, just putting a little bit of time to think about it. And I remember they really valued, even like you don't need to put the best foot, like I think they appreciated seeing things like my ability to take feedback or my ability to identify like weaknesses, because I think that as a teacher you constantly have to reflect. So I think that like my image of, like, you have to be this perfect human was sort of through the application process, like, you have to display humility and willingness to learn and all those things. So you don't really have to be perfect. It's just putting a very genuine version of you, and showing that you're interested and that you want to improve. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that because I have had the privilege of sitting in on a few assessment centers and doing the work with our selection team to figure out how to find that balance. And it always comes back to how do we see the real person? How do they thrive under challenge? How do they identify and reflect on those weaknesses or the things that they need to work on? And you're right, like we totally look for that ability to reflect and to act on feedback, because as a teacher, if you cannot reflect on your work, if you cannot act on feedback, you will drive that bus off the cliff immediately. Like that is just the way it is in the classroom. So we're trying to create that as realistic an environment as we can, recognizing the limitations of being online. Um, Aladdin, how was your experience through the application process?
Look, to some extent, similar to yourself, 2020. I mean, in my mind, I was like, oh, that's just yesterday. But actually, like, if you do know, it's actually quite a long time ago. No, I found the selection process, it was pretty rigorous, actually. I think I was a bit surprised. Like, I was like, oh my God, I've never even applied for a job that's got this many steps. So I had to do an application online from memory. I think it was a phone call. There was in-person group work challenges. And you're never sure whether, like, do I be dominant here, or like, do I like take a back seat, do I disagree, like, you kind of like, how does this work? And then there was a micro lesson, like that 7 minutes, and a one-on-one interview. I think, look, if I'm really reflective, I think I was a bit overconfident. And like, don't worry, teaching has definitely brought that down. There's nothing like the unsolicited feedback from a year 9 student about what you're wearing to really bring you down to earth. But because I had been in the education space a little bit, I honestly did have a bit of the jargon because I've been writing about it. I'd spoken to colleagues, but teaching the micro lesson, and mine in hindsight was shocking. But because one of the staff, or one of the panelists, actually decided to be a misbehaving student, and I hadn't really planned for that. Honestly, I just kind of planned, I'll do this really rush job. I think I taught like algebra, and I'm not a maths teacher. But I was like, this is what I'll be able to, get. Teaching a humanities concept will be too difficult. And I think that really threw me off, that I like didn't get it perfect. That was the start of the realization process that I wasn't perfect. In fact, I was far from it and had so much to learn. But what I did have, I think, and this is where it really came out in the one-on-one, as no, yeah, as Alice noted, like that reflectiveness. And they need to see like that you have potential, and that comes from like reflectiveness and your why. And I always had a strong why. I knew exactly like why, education mattered, because I'd been in the classroom before. And I think that was important, I guess, for them to see, because on paper, like, yes, I'd ticked a few of the boxes. I was able to talk the talk, but the lesson wasn't great. So I was a little bit like, oh, actually, I don't know how I went here. I thought I might have done better. Obviously, I did okay. I got in the end. But for me, it was actually like a bit, it was the start of the revelation process that I wasn't, the best.
And so humbling, right? Like it's
Very much so.
and I think it's like a clever thing in the design of the selection process that it is multi-stepped. because the way you perform, or the way you might describe or write about your work in a written application will be very different to how you talk about it on the phone, and how you talk to, or how you show up to the assessment center, whether it's online or in person. Um, and 9 times out of 10, we find that the folks who are borderline, like we assess them as, oh, maybe could be in, could be out. At the written application process, TFA has this philosophy that we always give people the benefit of the doubt, because that's the ethos and the kind of
Yeah.
values that we bring. And 9 times out of 10, it is right. It's the right read. At a selection day, sorry, at assessment center, they always show us their best foot. So um, that's something to keep in mind as you are considering applying for the program, is like, just shoot your shot, have a go. And the best thing that will happen, or the worst thing that will happen, is you don't get in this time, but you might learn something really, really valuable about yourself and about teaching as a profession along the way. How about
There
you,
were
Izzy?
definitely,
Oh, yeah,
oh,
go
sorry.
on. No,
Sorry.
go
I
on.
was saying there were definitely people that had applied multiple times as well.
Yes.
So I think that's to be aware. And I wasn't always the loudest in the room or the most confident person that like got through. There's multiple types of teachers, multiple types of effective teachers, and also naturally, like not always the
Mm.
loudest is the best. There were people who are a lot quieter, uncertain of themselves, who got in and did fabulously, and then vice versa. So anyway, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right to bring that up. Like, there are some people who've applied multiple times, and we always, when we give a phone call and say, sorry, you haven't made it this time, we always encourage people to reapply, because who you are at the point in which you apply, the next time you apply is going to be a whole year later. You're going to be a whole new person. You will have done all sorts of different things, and all those things in that improvement of self will be brought into the class, and they add up to make you the best teacher that you can be on day one for your students. Izzy, would you talk to how you found the process?
Yeah. I guess the first thing that I'll say about the process is I was applying from Canada the entire time. So
Did
TFA
you
were
do
like,
your assessment center at
yes,
nighttime?
yes.
Oh my gosh, you were one of those. Oh, well done. Like, seriously, well done.
Yeah, so well it was really good because TFA were really understanding of the fact that I like only had an international phone number and was kind of difficult to contact and really preferred to talk via email where possible because I couldn't afford a phone bill that could make calls to Australia. So that was really, really useful and really wonderful that TFA were so willing to take on, I guess, the sort of extra admin associated with my application. But I know for my written application, they were asking kind of essentially questions about how your own kind of belief system aligns with TFA's mission. And I think something that really stood out to me when I was applying was, um, I guess, how important it was to talk about, yeah, how aligned you are with the mission and sort of the fact that you can't be interested in TFA if it's just to get paid while you do uni. Like, there is so much that goes into teaching, and there are a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of effort, and it takes up a lot of space in your mind, especially while you're doing the program. That I was really conscious that not to get like really bachelor with it, but like had to be in it for the right reasons. And so really emphasizing the fact that my belief system was really aligned with TFA's mission was, I think, really important. Then I did do my assessment center kind of in the middle of the night, which was fun. And I remember thinking, like, goodness gracious, like I've worked all day and now I need to stay awake and I have to be at work really early tomorrow morning and I've just got to get through this assessment center. And all I thought was just pretend to be a teacher the whole time. I was like, just think about all the things that your teachers did in high school and copy that. And so I was trying really hard to sort of like have a good teacher voice and things like that. Like when I was delivering my mini lesson, which I cannot for the life of me remember what it was about. Um, Trying to sort of, I guess, like speak with a bit of authority and um, you know, balance the teaching with like engaging the people in front of me, and I think I my mind was really just going like 1,000 miles a minute trying to figure out what I was trying to do. And ultimately I found it a really fun process. Like I actually really enjoyed the assessment center because we did the mini lessons, which was really cool because you get to like it's quite fun to pretend you're kind of in school. Like I got to do a maths lesson, I think, in mine, and I was like, wow, I haven't done maths in a while. This is kind of cute and fun. Um, so that was really fun. And then we did like I think it was like a mock parent teacher interview, which was just wild. That was, I think, where I was really pretending to be a teacher. I was like, what on earth happened in my parent teacher interviews? Um, and just and then from there we did I think it was sort of like a problem solving group activity where you had to decide some things about where funding was going to go. And I guess I kind of just had to like maintain in my mind like why am I in this? Like why am I interested in doing this? And it's because I really want to be able to help students from all backgrounds be able to learn and be able to feel engaged in their school system and a part of the school community because I was so fortunate to feel so connected to my own school community and connected to my teachers. And so really centering the student in all of those three things. I really just trying my best to do that. I'm sure it was like fairly disastrous at the time, but I think uh, I hopefully came across as like quite earnestly being interested in the outcome of the student sort of first and foremost and being able to support them. And I think that, well, I hope that that sort of came through my written application and my assessment center.
I mean, undoubtedly it's come through enough because here you are in alumnihood, so well done. Um, I always find it really like I'm just so admirable of like the people who are doing assessment center from overseas because I often do the assessment centers and honestly we can usually cannot tell that it's the middle of the night for them because they just look polished, they look like they're bringing their best. And I remember one assessment center was getting to the afternoon here in Australia. We're wrapping up and I was like, is the sun rising in your background? Like, is that a window? And then the participant was like, yeah, it's morning. I'm in the UK. And I was like, oh, this whole time you didn't tell us. Because often, if we know if we can make accommodations, run them at slightly different times, things like that. But I was just amazed. I could not have picked if this person hadn't told me. So I guess thinking about like the process, right? So to get into the program, you do the written application when the round's open. Um, Before you submit your application, there are many options to test your suitability or how much you actually really love the program. And that's by doing things like attending webinar sessions like this, but also feel free to reach out to our recruitment team because they are continually running coffee events in most capital cities where they'll sit down, have a coffee with you or have a phone chat with you and say, hey, this is what it's like. What are you concerned about? And let's talk through those steps together. And so when I went through my application process, I was so keen to submit my application because at that point, I had been thinking about becoming a teacher for about a year. And I'd spent a lot of time kind of resisting the pull to TFA because I was like, I really want to do it, but no, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to make lots of money. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to help kids who are in jail. It's going to be awesome. And then it kind of like I did lots and lots of kind of like self-exploring, like figuring out what it is that I actually want to do in the world, like what is the change I want to make. And I saw this recruitment video from TFA that just like changed me. And the kind of tagline was like, um, kids are falling through the education gap. You didn't, they shouldn't. And I was like, whoa, that's speaking to me. And I had this moment that just like fully crystallized it for me. And I was like, submit the application. As soon as it opened in round one of my application year, I was like, in it, submit, done. Um, and I just remember how the process itself taught me a huge amount about what I was signing up for, about myself, about how I was thinking about what I was passionate about. I wonder if each of you would talk to or think about and then like share a little bit about how it was for you when you found out that you got into the program, and then subsequently how or when you learned where you were placed. So Alice, you shared before that you were placed in Melbourne, and that if you hadn't been in a capital city, would it have been a deal breaker for you?
I'm not sure. I was just kind of very hesitant and I wasn't sure if it was what I wanted to do. I think I was just very confused coming out of COVID and I had some plans kind of get cut off because of
Yeah.
international travel and everything. So I was kind of just loitering until I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. And so it was just like something like a hand that just kept getting closer and closer, being like, here's something worthwhile to do. And so, yeah, I remember a similar quote. I remember like looking up the TFA website and being like, your educational outcome shouldn't be dictated by your postcode or something like that. And I was kind of reflective. I never really considered myself having a privileged education, but I think that made me like look up my school and think about that I actually did have quite a privileged education, like growing up in a city and going to an academically selective high school. And so, yeah, I just really wanted, I knew that that wasn't something I should take for granted. And I think it would be good for me to contribute my good luck and privilege and give back to students that might not have that opportunity. So yeah.
And so when you found out that you got into the program, was it like yes, this was the thing that like cemented it for you, or are you still kind of hesitant? Like, talk me through that.
Yeah, I was still kind of hesitant because,
Mm.
and then I had a phone call with my case manager who was very supportive, but also like had more confidence in than I had in
Mm.
myself. I was like, oh, maybe I'm not like, I was still quite young. So I was like, maybe I'm not in the right, like, I don't have enough life experience. Like, I think just going into a classroom of students from all different kinds of backgrounds, maybe ones that didn't value education as much as my family did. It was really daunting. I felt like such an imposter. But I think after having that conversation with the case manager and with the principal and the assistant principal at my school, they all seemed to have confidence in me. So I was like, oh, let's give it a go. So yeah.
That's so good. And the way that we kind of work with our recruitment model in Teach for Australia is that after you've submitted and you're through the first couple of rounds, you have like a buddy, like a TFA mirror to you, who's like a caseworker, right? And whose job in the org is to make sure that you feel confident and are prepared to go through the subsequent stages of the selection process. And they're like your personal cheerleaders. Like they will get to know you and try and understand your motivation, help you to frame that. And often they're the ones who are like, you can totally do this. Just do it. And I think that for me, that was the push that I needed, because when I got into the program, I was like, I was living in Sydney and I'd only ever lived in Adelaide. And I was like, I will move to Melbourne. Maybe I'll go 1 hour out of the city, maybe. And I just like had no concept of the rest of the world. But in my placement preference survey, there was a tiny little box that was like, send me anywhere. And I was like, I'll tick that. And then I got a phone call saying, hey, you've been placed in the Northern Territory. And I was like, where? Like, what are you talking about? That wasn't on my survey. Um, and I had a similar pep talk where it was like, this is a school that really needs you. So, all right, fine, I'll go. And it was the best decision I've ever made in my whole life. Aladdin, what was it like when you got into the program and then you had to relocate the program too?
Yes, yeah. I was pretty stoked to get in. It was more of a relief for my ego, honestly. But no, I was really happy to be in. Going rural was a very new experience for me. As I noted, like, yeah, lived in Sydney, lived in London, was all about big cities. I was like, East Coast, East Coast. I'm not going over there now. I live in Adelaide. I actually didn't get my first preference, so I got given Perth. And my mum's from WA, so she had told me bad things. There's nothing wrong with WA, but I was like, I actually burst into tears when I was like, it's like 18 years of indoctrination. And I was like, no. But no, Perth's great. But I actually said no to my first offer. I was like, no, this isn't for me. It's too far away. So then I ended up getting, Shepparton, Numurkah, which is about 3.5 hours away from Melbourne. And I was like, you know what, that feels like more like what I want. There's a really big community of TFAs as well in the Golden Valley, and that was one of the things. So obviously, when you preference where you want, you can also say like, what are the things that would make the experience really fulfilling for me. So if you have a family, that's taken into consideration, or if there's other things. And for me, community was one of the biggest things. And certainly you get that from living in a regional or rural community, absolutely. But it's also quite nice to have other people who are going through the process with you, because they like really get it, because they're feeling the same emotions at the same time. So yeah, look, I found the process of getting in really fantastic. I was so happy. I think, like the whole of TFA, the experience is very humbling as well, though. I thought I was aware of like poverty and educational inequity, and until you get to actually see it. And I also was in wellbeing during COVID, so I was doing like food drops, and like, so actually going to people's houses, not just seeing the kids come in. And I think that for me was just like, I'd never had such a sense of like purpose and realization, and just like, whoa. I knew I was privileged. I went to a very privileged high school, but I didn't know like truly how privileged I was. And then coming back to Sydney and speaking to friends, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this exists in Australia. You go from like a couple of hours and suddenly it's a whole different world. So yeah, I think to answer the question, I guess, yeah, I was really, really excited to get in. And where I was placed was fantastic. And I wanted to go rural because I wanted a real experience. And that's not to say Metro is not a real experience, but for me, it was such a big change. And I was like, I'm going to really challenge myself. I had to think long and hard about even doing that, because you're like, once you tick the box, you're like, okay, well, this is an offer. This might happen. Have to be okay with it. But it was the best thing that I ever did, I think, for me personally.
Yeah, amazing. And I get that sense, that feeling of like of whiplash when you come back to your pre-TFA life and you have conversations with people who were just like you or are just like you, pre-TFA. Um, it's shocking. It's
Yeah.
startling and a little bit upsetting, but there's also so much opportunity there to share.
Absolutely. And
Mm,
you enter a fabulous community, obviously the community that you're in, in this case,
yeah.
but also a fabulous TFA community, fabulous
Mm,
community of educators, teachers for on the whole are incredibly passionate people. Um,
mm.
there's always the oddballs, but like for the most part, it's a really welcoming career. I think, as Alice noted, very female centric, which was a kind of odd experience for me as a male. Sometimes like a diversity hire, honestly. But yeah, I think it's a fabulous career to go into, and you'll get so many different communities out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Izzy, tell us about what it was like for you and how you heard about your placement call and what that was like.
Yeah, well, when I got in, I was really excited, and then I was really daunted with the fact I was like, "Oh, I'm moving. I am not staying in inner city Melbourne because there are no schools in inner city Melbourne that kind of fall under TFA's criteria." And so I really thought about it, and I was like, "Okay, do I do I want to stay in Melbourne and effectively this is ridiculous thinking, but I was like, am I going to commute an hour from my house every day, or am I just going to move regionally and probably commute way less and like kind of just leave? And I was like, you know what? It'll be like really fun. It'll be an adventure. So, I preference regional Victoria first. And that's where I ended up. And I saw Shepparton, and I'd spent like 2 weekends in Shepparton. I had a disastrous family reunion here once, and my dad did a triathlon here the other time. So I was like, okay, don't really know what's going on here. Um, and when I got my placement school, um, I Googled it. And um, if you're familiar at all with Shepparton Education, which Aladdin, you'll be across this, I work at what is
Your Google would have been very interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
work
absolutely.
at what is colloquially known as a super school, which is the merger of four high schools into one high school. So there are 2,000 kids at my school. And it's a real melting pot of different cultures and religions and viewpoints. And the merger happened, I think we'd be in our fifth year or sixth year now. Um, and when it happened, it was really, really challenging, and a lot of the press about the school was really negative, and so it was quite daunting. And having spoken to an associate who was up here, she was very transparent about the challenges that she'd faced. but she was also so uh she spoke so highly of the amount of support that was provided to her and how um like how much faith the school had in her ability to get in there and teach with, very little experience. And that has absolutely been my experience at the school. It's been so, so positive. Um, I've never felt like a lack of support from the school at all. And um, they've definitely like they've definitely sort of that they've not lived up to the reputation that the Herald Sun paints, which is really good, and it's really unfair what the Herald Sun says. Anyway, um I also, when in my application process, said that I was really, really keen on going to a school that had other associates, Teach for Australia associates, because I was just so conscious that I was going into such like a unique program. And so I said that community was really important. And just as Aladdin said, the Golden Valley, it's full of TFAs. It's awesome. And so it's been really, really cool to be able to go through the program with so many other TFA associates around, whether it's at my own school or at, Namurka, or, there are so many schools in the GV. If I tried to list them all, we'd be here a while. But yeah, it was really cool. TFA really made an effort to think about my preferences and really like cater to them, which was really, really nice.
Yeah, and I think I was on staff when we were starting to place at Shep a few years after the merger. And we saw what was coming out of the media, and we also had a really close relationship with the school leadership there. And the contrast was like night and day. The reality on the ground, how hard the leadership was working. They were just working around the clock to make this merger work. Um, and it seems to have become quite a success story, which is amazing to hear. And for TFA to be part of that kind of startup story is pretty special too. One final question to each of you before we wrap up this evening. What would you say to pre-TFA you, the person who was thinking about doing the application, the person who was feeling nervous or uncertain or unsure about whether or not this was the right path? Like, what would you say as a piece of advice or a nudge, whatever you think you needed to hear? Go for it, Alice.
I'd say focus on the positives.
Yeah, I love it. Critical to being a teacher.
I would say it'll be the best and the most challenging thing that you've ever done in your entire life. And it will honestly change you as a person, I think. And I say teaching broadly, but very much the TFA journey too.
Amazing.
I think I'd say you're not going to realize how much you can love your job. Um, I I don't think I realized how much I could enjoy and just like be so excited about going to work every day. And so that's been really, really special to find.
Mm. And it's pretty amazing that I remember when I was in my first year, I was so in love with the work that I was shocked that they were paying me. Like, why would you pay me to do this? Something I would tell myself is similarly that this is the hardest and most transformative thing you'll ever do. But also after TFA, you can do anything. I have 3 young children. It is piss easy. It is like year nines on a Friday, so much harder. Laboratory equipment, glass everywhere, so much harder. 3 kids, nothing. Um, Thank you all so much for your time this evening. We'll wrap it up there, and I've got a couple of reminders for the audience that I want to work through so that I don't forget anything. But thank you all so, so much for your contributions and your candor and your willingness to engage warmly this evening. So for those of you joining us in the webinar, a few links are going to be dropped in the chat for you this evening. One for the events page on our website where you can register to attend any of our upcoming events. Come to more webinars if you like. Just enjoy, live the TFA dream. If you want to have a one-on-one discussion with our recruiters, please email the address that's going to be dropped into the chat, and they'll reach out to you, and they will be maybe your personal cheerleader. We'll also be sending you an email after this webinar with these links as well, and also the recording of tonight's chat. So Thank you so much for joining us. And a quick reminder that our first round of recruitment for cohort 2027 is now open and it'll close on the 30th of March. Amazing. Have a good evening, everyone.